Rich woman humiliates cleaner at the grocery store. In labor, only she can save her. Then she finds out. The shopping cart toppled with a metallic crash that echoed throughout the grocery store aisle. Cans rolled across the waxed floor, and a bag of rice split open, scattering white grains like dirty snow. Helen felt the blood rush to her face as she quickly crouched down, her trembling hands trying to gather everything before anyone noticed. But it was too late. A thin, red high heel appeared in her field of vision, stopping inches from the rice grains. Helen slowly raised her eyes and met the icy gaze of Patricia Armstrong, the wealthiest woman in the neighborhood, with her Prada sunglasses pushed up on her head and an expression of absolute disgust plastered on her perfectly made-up face. What Helen couldn't imagine was that in less than 2 hours, that same woman who looked at her with such contempt would be begging for her help, revealing a secret that would change both of their lives forever. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel to always receive exciting and special stories like this one. Now let's get to know the full story of Helen and Patricia. Helen Foster was 32 years old, but the wrinkles around her eyes and the permanent stoop in her back made her seem at least 10 years older. Her brown hair was always pulled into a tight bun, revealing graying temples she had neither the time nor the money to hide. Her hands, rough and red from scrubbing floors and walls, told the story of a life dedicated to domestic work. She woke up every day at 4:30 in the morning, when the sky was still dark and the empty streets of the Oakwood Hills neighborhood were just beginning to wake up. The routine was always the same. She prepared a simple breakfast for Lucas, her 9-year-old son, who was still sleeping curled up under a thin blanket in the only bed in the small room they shared. The 2-room apartment was at the back of an old building, with peeling walls and a leaky ceiling that formed brown mold stains. Helen would look at her sleeping son and feel her chest tighten. He deserved so much more than this. By 5:15, Helen was on the street, walking the 20 minutes to the bus stop. She didn't have money for 2 buses, so part of the journey was always on foot, even when it rained. Her 3 regular clients were all in Blue Lake Estates, the gated community where the city's elite lived. Huge houses with impeccable gardens, sparkling pools, and garages that housed cars that cost more than Helen would earn in her entire lifetime. The first house belonged to Ms. Marisa, a kind 70-year-old widow who always offered her coffee and sometimes left her food leftovers. The second belonged to the Santos couple, both doctors who were rarely home, and left instructions on notes stuck to the refrigerator. The third house was Patricia Armstrong's. Patricia was 28 years old and married to Richard Armstrong, heir to a chain of luxury car dealerships. She didn't work, spending her days between expensive gyms, beauty salons, and endless lunches with her equally idle friends. She had everything money could buy but never seemed satisfied. Her light, almost transparent eyes always carried a coldness that made Helen feel smaller than she already was. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Helen arrived at Patricia's mansion at 2 in the afternoon. The house had 3 floors, 6 bedrooms, a heated pool, and a walk-in closet larger than Helen's entire apartment. But what hurt the most wasn't the size of the house or the ostentation of the objects. It was the way Patricia treated her. She never called her by her name. It was always a disdainful "you," or she would simply snap her fingers when she wanted something. Helen had to wear a uniform, but not just any uniform. Patricia demanded it be grey, the plainest color possible, and that Helen keep her hair completely covered by a cap. She said it was for hygiene, but Helen knew it was so she wouldn't have to look at her as a human being. That Saturday in November, Helen wasn't working, but she needed to do the grocery shopping for the week. The neighborhood grocery store was more expensive, but it was all she could afford. She calculated every dollar, compared prices, always picked the cheapest brands. Her cart held the basics: rice, beans, pasta, a few vegetables, a pack of chicken. Nothing superfluous. No treats for Lucas, though he never complained. It happened in the cereal aisle. Helen was distracted, checking the price of rice on the bottom shelf, when she didn't notice her cart was in the way. The brusque bump made her lose her balance, and the cart toppled with that terrible noise that seemed amplified in the relative silence of the supermarket. Patricia looked stunning, as always. A tight white dress, red high heels, a designer bag hanging from her arm. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and the expensive perfume invaded the air around her. But the expression on her face was pure venom. "Don't you watch where you're going?" Her voice echoed loudly, drawing the attention of other customers who began to stare. "This is why people like you live in poverty. No manners, no sense of space. Look at the mess you've made." Helen felt tears burning in her eyes but refused to let them fall. She quickly bent down, gathering the cans with trembling hands. "I'm sorry, Miss Armstrong. I didn't see. I was just—" "I don't want your pathetic apologies." Patricia took a step back as if Helen were contagious. "You work in my home and you still haven't learned to have a minimum of decency. In fact, after this, I think you'd better not show up on Tuesday. I'm hiring someone else, someone who knows how to behave in public." The floor seemed to open beneath Helen's feet. That job represented a third of her monthly income. Without it, she wouldn't be able to pay the rent. She wouldn't be able to buy enough food. "Please, Miss Armstrong, I need this job. My son—" "I don't care about your family problems." Patricia turned, tossing her hair back. "You're fired, and if I were you, I'd learn not to get in people's way." The people around watched in silence, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity, but no one said anything. No one interfered. Helen finished gathering her groceries with her face burning with humiliation, pushed the crooked cart to the checkout, and paid with the crumpled bills she pulled from the bottom of her old purse. The walk back home was a haze of tears and despair. How would she tell Lucas? How would they pay the bills? Helen had savings for maybe 2 months, if she was very lucky and cut everything possible. But what about after that? That night, lying in bed next to her peacefully sleeping son, Helen looked at the stained ceiling and allowed herself to cry silently. She remembered when she was 17 and found out she was pregnant. Lucas's father, a 20-year-old boy she'd met at a party, disappeared as soon as he found out about the pregnancy. She never saw him again, never received $1 in child support. Her own mother, a rigid and religious woman, had kicked her out of the house. She said Helen had brought shame to the family, that she was a lost cause, a sinner. Helen tried to continue her studies while her belly grew, but the judgmental stares at school were too much. She dropped out in her sophomore year of high school. She never went back. Lucas was born in a public hospital in a difficult labor that lasted 18 hours. When they placed that tiny baby in her arms, Helen swore she would give him everything she never had: unconditional love, presence, protection. Even if it meant working until her bones ached and exhaustion was a constant companion. She started as a nanny, then a housekeeper, then a cleaner. She went from job to job as her employer's needs changed. Some were kind, most were indifferent, some were cruel. But none had been as deliberately mean as Patricia. Helen didn't understand. Why did a woman who had everything need to humiliate someone who had nothing? What kind of void inside someone needed to be filled with the pain of others? In the following weeks, Helen doubled her shifts, took on extra heavy cleaning jobs in offices at night, anything to make up for the lost income. She saw Lucas only a few hours a day. The boy, sensing his mother's anguish, even without fully understanding, began to make his own snacks to try to help as best he could. It was on a rainy December morning that Helen received an unexpected call. The number was unknown. "Hello? Helen?" The voice was Ms. Marissa's, the elderly widow. "Dear, I'm calling because Patricia Armstrong is looking for you. She called me asking for your number. She said it's urgent." Helen felt her stomach churn. "Why?" "She fired me." "I know, dear. But she seemed desperate. She said she needs to talk to you. I think you should call." Helen wrote down the number with a trembling hand. What could Patricia want? To humiliate her some more? To rub in her face how she had found a better cleaner? It took her 3 days to muster the courage to call. Patricia's voice on the other end of the line was different. There was still arrogance, but there was also something Helen never expected to hear there. Fear. "I need you to come back. Tuesdays and Thursdays as before. I'll pay double." Helen was silent, processing. "Why? You said I was fired." I made a mistake." There was a long pause. "I need someone I can trust." "Trust?" Helen felt anger bubbling up. "You humiliated me in public, fired me in front of strangers, and now you want me back. I'll triple your pay." Patricia's voice trembled slightly. "Please." That "please" sounded so strange coming from her mouth that Helen almost didn't recognize it. But money was money, and 3 times the salary meant she could pay the overdue bills and maybe even buy Lucas a new pair of sneakers. "All right, I'll be back on Tuesday. But before we continue and discover the outcome of this emotional story, leave your like here in the video, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and activate the bell so you don't miss any new stories. Have you ever been unfairly humiliated by someone who later needed you? How did you react? Also tell me which city you are watching this video from. I'll mark your comment with a special heart. Now, let's get back to our story. When Helen arrived at the mansion the following Tuesday, something was different. The house, normally impeccable, showed signs of neglect. Some dishes in the kitchen sink, a pile of unopened mail, towels thrown in the bathroom. Patricia was sitting in the living room, wearing sweatpants and no makeup, which was shocking in itself. Start with the kitchen. Her voice was low, without the usual cutting authority. Helen worked in silence for hours. Patricia disappeared somewhere in the house, and Helen didn't see her again until the end of the day. When she left, she received her payment in cash, in a thick envelope. Triple, as promised. The weeks passed, and a strange pattern emerged. Patricia hardly spoke to Helen, but she no longer treated her with the open contempt of before. She was always distracted, looking at her phone anxiously, startling at any noise. Richard, her husband, never seemed to be home. It was in early January that Helen noticed something definitive. Patricia was pregnant. The belly was still small but unmistakable under the loose clothes she now wore. And by the way, Patricia tried to hide it, pulling her clothes tight against her body when she passed mirrors. This pregnancy was not a cause for celebration. One afternoon, Helen was cleaning the master bedroom when she heard raised voices coming from the study. The door was ajar. "You don't understand, Richard. I can't have this baby now." Patricia's voice was laden with panic. "It's not my decision, Patricia." His voice was cold, distant. "You made your choices. Now deal with the consequences. You can't just abandon me. We're married." "On paper. Only on paper. And you know exactly why." Helen quickly moved away, her heart racing. She didn't want to hear more. She didn't want to get involved. But the words echoed in her mind. What did that mean? In the following weeks, the situation visibly worsened. Patricia was thinner except for her growing belly. She had deep, dark circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled. Richard didn't appear anymore. Helen found out, through comments she overheard from the landscaper, that he was living in an apartment downtown. One day, while cleaning the bathroom, Helen found boxes of antidepressant medication in the cabinet. It was all starting to make sense. Patricia wasn't just mean by nature. She was deeply unhappy, and her cruelty was the only way she knew to exert some control over a life that was falling apart. But Helen refused to feel sorry for her. Not after what happened at the grocery store. Not after years of being treated as inferior. She did her work, collected her pay, and left. It was on a rainy Thursday in February that everything changed. Helen arrived at the mansion at the usual time, but something was wrong. The front door was unlocked, ajar. She entered carefully, calling out, "Miss Armstrong?" A faint moan came from upstairs. Helen quickly ran up the stairs and found Patricia collapsed on the second-floor hallway, holding her now large belly, her face contorted in pain. Her water had broken, and a puddle was forming around her on the marble floor. "It's happening," Patricia gasped, tears streaming down her face. "The baby is coming." Helen grabbed her phone to call an ambulance, but Patricia grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "No, you don't understand. You can't," she screamed as another contraction hit. "They'll take my baby. They'll commit me. Richard, he has a court order. He will—" "Calm down," Helen tried to pull away. "I need to call for help. You have a son. You know what it's like. Please, don't let them take my baby." Helen was paralyzed. She saw pure desperation in Patricia's eyes, a desperation she knew intimately, the desperation of a mother who fears losing her child. She tried to call the ambulance again, but there was no signal. The storm outside had knocked out the lines. The landline in the house was dead. She was alone with a woman in advanced labor. The first aid training she had taken years ago when she tried for a job as an elderly caregiver came back in flashes. Helen ran to get clean towels, boiled water, sterilized scissors. Her hands worked on autopilot while her mind screamed that she wasn't prepared for this. "You need to get down to a more comfortable place." Helen tried to help Patricia up, but she screamed in pain. I can't move." So Helen improvised. She brought pillows, blankets, made a nest right there on the cold hallway floor. Patricia gripped her hand with brutal strength with each contraction, breaking down any barrier that still existed between them. "I'm going to die," Patricia cried. "I'm going to die, and my baby will die, and it will all be my fault." You are not going to die. Helen surprised herself with the firmness in her own voice. I am here. I won't let anything happen to you. And in that moment, Helen realized it was true. Despite everything, despite the humiliation, despite the cruelty, she couldn't let a woman and a baby die. That wasn't who she was. The following hours were the longest and most intense of Helen's life. Patricia pushed, screamed, cried. Helen wiped her face, held her hand, spoke words of encouragement. The storm raged outside, and inside the luxurious mansion, two women fought together for the life that was trying to be born. When the baby finally emerged, purplish and silent, Helen felt her heart stop. No, it can't be. She quickly cleared his airways, massaged his tiny chest with trembling fingers. He's not breathing. Patricia tried to sit up. My baby! Helen blew gently on the baby's face, massaged more, and suddenly a fragile cry filled the air. A cry that grew into a healthy, strong roar. She wrapped the baby in a clean, soft towel and placed him on Patricia's chest. Tears streamed down both their faces. Patricia held her son with a reverence Helen had never seen in her fingers trembling as they touched the perfect little face. You saved our lives. Patricia's voice was a hoarse whisper. Why? After everything I did. Helen wiped her own tears and began to clean Patricia, to make her comfortable, to care for the umbilical cord as she vaguely remembered the procedure. Because every child deserves to have a living mother. And every mother deserves the chance to love her child. Patricia looked at her, really looked perhaps for the first time, and something broke inside her. The sobs came with force, years of pain and loneliness and despair pouring out as she held the baby against her chest. The storm began to pass. Helen managed to call an ambulance, which arrived 20 minutes later. The paramedics were impressed with the work she had done. Patricia refused to let go of Helen's hand during the entire ride to the hospital. It was only at the hospital, while Patricia and the baby were being examined, that Helen had a moment to process what had happened. She was sitting in the waiting room, her clothes stained, exhausted to the bone, when Richard Armstrong appeared. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of looks that came from good genes and even better plastic surgery. But there was something cruel about the line of his mouth. Where is my wife? He didn't even look at Helen properly. In room 305, but before you go in there. Helen stood up, planting herself in front of him. She just went through hell. Your son is healthy and perfect. If you go into that room and cause any kind of trouble, I will call security myself. Richard blinked, surprised by the audacity of this small, visibly exhausted woman. Who do you think you are? I'm the person who saved your wife's and your son's lives today. And unlike you, when she needed someone, I was there. He opened his mouth to retort but closed it. Something in Helen's firm gaze made him back down. He passed by her and entered the room. Helen didn't stay to see what happened. She was too tired, too emotional. She took the bus home, hugged Lucas tightly until he complained she was suffocating him, and collapsed into bed. She woke up the next day to 23 missed calls from Patricia. 23. She called back with a racing heart. Helen! Patricia's voice was different, softer, more human. Please, I need to talk to you. Can you come to the hospital? When Helen arrived, she found Patricia sitting in the bed, the baby sleeping peacefully beside her. But what shocked her was seeing Richard there too, standing by the window with a grim expression on his face. Helen, sit down, please. Patricia indicated the chair by the bed. Helen sat down cautiously, her eyes alternating between the two. Patricia took a deep breath. I need to tell you something. Something that explained everything. The silence stretched, tense and heavy. Then Patricia began to speak, and Helen heard a story she never expected. Patricia and Richard did not have a real marriage. It was a carefully orchestrated farce. Richard was gay and had been in a secret relationship with another man for years, but his family, traditional and wealthy, would never accept it. So he made a deal with Patricia. A marriage of convenience. She would have access to wealth and status. He would maintain appearances. But Patricia made a mistake. She fell in love with another man, got pregnant. The baby's father was married and abandoned her as soon as he found out about the pregnancy. Richard was furious. This was not part of the deal. He threatened divorce, public exposure, destruction of her reputation. Patricia fell into a deep depression. She thought about an abortion, but couldn't go through with it. She thought about adoption, but the idea shattered her. She was trapped in a life of superficial luxury but profound emptiness, and the pregnancy exposed all the cracks in her perfect facade. And I treated you horribly, because I projected my self-hatred onto you. Patricia wiped her tears. You had something I never had, authenticity. You worked honestly, raised your son alone, had real dignity. And I couldn't stand to look at that because it made me realize how empty my life was. Helen was silent, processing. Part of her wanted to get up and leave. Part of her wanted to scream that wealth didn't justify cruelty. But another part, the part that had held Patricia's hand during the contractions, that had seen the absolute love in her eyes when she held the baby, that part understood that pain is pain, regardless of the bank account. I'm not going to pretend everything is okay. Helen spoke slowly. You hurt me deeply. You humiliated me when I was already down. But, she looked at the sleeping baby, I've also been so desperate I didn't know how to act. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. And sometimes when we're scared, we hurt people who don't deserve it. Patricia nodded, fresh tears falling. I don't deserve your forgiveness. It's not about deserving. Helen stood up. It's about choosing who we want to be. You can continue being the person who humiliates others, or you can be the mother this baby needs. The choice is yours. She was leaving when Patricia called out, Helen, wait. Helen stopped at the door. I want to be different. I want my son to grow up knowing real people, not just other empty people like I was. Could you teach me how to be a real mother? Helen turned, studying Patricia's face. She saw sincerity there, and vulnerability and hope. I can try. In the months that followed, something extraordinary happened. Patricia and Richard divorced, but amicably. He came out publicly and moved with his partner to another city, where they started a new life. He left Patricia the mansion and a generous sum. But Patricia no longer wanted that life. She sold the mansion, donated half the money to charity, and bought a smaller, comfortable house in a middle-class neighborhood. A house with a backyard where her son could play, where she could just be a mother, not a queen in an ivory tower. And she hired Helen, not as a cleaner, but as a friend and advisor. She paid her a fair salary to help her learn to care for the baby, to cook simple meals, to live an authentic life. Lucas and Patricia's son, whom she named Gabriel, grew up together like brothers. Patricia also went back to school. She got a degree in psychology, specializing in helping women in situations of emotional abuse and psychological violence. She transformed her pain into purpose. Helen, in turn, with the extra money and Patricia's support, managed to finish high school. Then she took a technical nursing course. She discovered she had a natural talent for caring for people, and on that terrible day when she helped Gabriel be born, she had found her true calling. One afternoon, 2 years after that day in the grocery store, Helen and Patricia were sitting in the backyard of the new house, watching Lucas and Gabriel play in an inflatable pool. The sun was warm on their faces, and the smell of cake baking in the kitchen floated in the air. Have you ever forgiven me? Patricia asked suddenly. For real? Helen thought for a long moment. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. I still remember how I felt that day. Small, humiliated, worthless. But when I look at you now, I no longer see the woman who hurt me. I see a mother working hard to raise her son with love. I see a friend. So yes, I think I have forgiven you. Patricia wiped the tears that sprang up. You are the strongest person I know. Helen smiled. Strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting up every time we do. At that moment, Gabriel shouted, Mommy, look, and did a clumsy somersault in the water. Patricia jumped up, running to applaud and make sure he was okay. Her face lit up with a genuine love that had nothing to do with status or appearances. Helen watched and felt her heart warm. Who would have thought that from that public humiliation, that moment of absolute pain, would be born not only an unlikely friendship but also the chance for two women to become better versions of themselves? She thought of all the times she had wanted to retaliate, to scream, to humiliate Patricia back when she had the chance. But she had chosen differently. She had chosen empathy, even when it was the last thing she wanted to offer. And that choice had changed not only Patricia and Gabriel's lives, but her own as well. Lucas got out of the pool and ran to Helen, dripping water. Mum, can Gabriel have a sleepover at our house tomorrow? Helen looked at Patricia, who nodded enthusiastically. Of course you can, honey. As the boys celebrated and went back into the water, Patricia sat down next to Helen again. You know, I still go to that grocery store sometimes. I walk down the cereal aisle and remember who I was that day, and I feel so ashamed. You shouldn't. Helen touched her arm gently. That day was horrible, but it was also the start of something important. It was when you hit rock bottom and realized you needed to change. Sometimes I think it was the universe punishing me for all the bad things I did. Patricia hugged her knees. Going into labor in the middle of a storm with only the person I hurt the most nearby, it feels like poetic justice. Or maybe, Helen reflected, it was the universe giving you exactly what you needed. Someone who understood your pain, because they had been through the same thing. Someone who could see past your anger and find the frightened person underneath. In the following years, the friendship between the two women only deepened. Helen became a nurse and began working in a public hospital, caring for low-income mothers during difficult births. With every life she helped bring into the world, she remembered that day with Gabriel and felt gratitude for having been placed in that impossible situation. Patricia opened a support center for women in abusive relationships, offering free therapy, legal assistance, and temporary shelter. She used her own story as a testimony that it was possible to rebuild a life, regardless of the starting point. Lucas grew up and became a studious young man planning to study medicine. He never forgot the difficulties his mother faced raising him alone and carried that as motivation to help other families in vulnerable situations. Gabriel, in turn, was a sweet and empathetic child who treated everyone with natural kindness, a direct reflection of the transformed mother Patricia had become. There were still difficult moments. Patricia had relapses of depression, days when she could barely get out of bed. Helen was there, bringing food, caring for Gabriel, reminding her that darkness is temporary. Helen also had her crises, when bills piled up or when the exhaustion from her hospital work seemed too much. Patricia returned the support, helping financially when necessary, but always with discretion and respect. 5 years after that memorable Thursday, Helen received a special invitation. Patricia was giving a speech at a national conference on overcoming adversity and personal transformation, and she wanted Helen to be present. The speech was in a huge auditorium, packed with people. Patricia took the stage with Gabriel by her side, now 7 years old, holding a child-sized microphone. Patricia began by telling her story without filters. The empty life, the fake marriage, the gratuitous cruelty, the depression. She spared no details about her failures and mistakes. The audience was in absolute silence, hypnotized. Then she got to the part about the grocery store. I publicly humiliated a woman who was just trying to buy food for her son, a woman who worked for me, and whom I treated as if she were invisible. I fired her right there in front of strangers, because my own misery needed a target. Patricia paused, tears streaming freely. And when my life completely fell apart, when I went into labor alone during a storm, guess who showed up? That same woman. And she had every right to leave me there, to let karma do its work. But she didn't. Gabriel took the microphone. Aunt Helen saved my life. She saved Mommy too. She's my hero. The audience erupted in applause. Patricia gestured for Helen, who was sitting in the front row, to come up on stage. Helen hesitated, but the encouragement from the crowd pushed her forward. When the two women embraced on stage, it was impossible to tell where one story ended and the other began. There stood two mothers, two completely different paths that had crossed at the exact moment when both needed it most. Helen took the microphone with trembling hands. I didn't do anything special that day. I did what any person should do, help someone in need. But what Patricia did afterwards, she paused, looking at her friend. That was extraordinary. She had the courage to look inside herself, acknowledge her mistakes, and completely change. That is true strength. The two walked off the stage to enthusiastic applause. In the days that followed, the story went viral on social media. Hundreds of people commented, sharing their own experiences with humiliation, forgiveness, and redemption. One comment in particular touched both of them deeply. It was from a woman named Sandra. I was the Patricia. I treated my housekeeper badly because my life was a hell disguised as privilege. After seeing this story, I apologized to her. We started talking for real for the first time in 3 years. I discovered we have much more in common than I imagined. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to change. Helen read the comment aloud to Patricia as they had coffee in the kitchen of the house. Did you see how many lives your courage is touching? Helen smiled. You've transformed your pain into light for other people. Patricia held her friend's hand across the table. I only managed because you showed me it was possible. You taught me that kindness isn't weakness, that forgiving doesn't mean accepting the unacceptable. You taught me to be human. We taught each other that, Helen replied. I learned from you too. I learned that people can truly change, that we shouldn't define anyone by their worst moment. Gabriel ran into the kitchen, followed by Lucas. Mom, Mom. Gabriel pulled on Patricia's shirt. The teacher asked us to tell the class about people we admire. Can I tell them about you and Aunt Helen? Patricia knelt down to be at her son's eye level. Of course you can, my love. But don't forget to tell the part where Mummy made a lot of mistakes before she got it right. It's important for kids to know that everyone makes mistakes. And that you can fix mistakes? Gabriel asked with his big, sincere eyes. Exactly. Helen stroked the boy's hair. You can always fix them, if you have the courage to try. That night, after the boys were asleep, Helen and Patricia stayed on the porch watching the stars. The sky was clear, cloudless, so different from that terrible storm years ago. Do you think people really believe I've changed? Patricia asked quietly. Or do they think it's just an act? Helen thought before answering. I don't think it matters what others think. What matters is that Gabriel will grow up with a present, loving and real mother. That you wake up every day choosing to be better. That when you look in the mirror you recognize and like the person you see. And you? Patricia turned to her. Have you really forgiven me? Or is there still a part of you that holds a grudge? Helen was honest. Sometimes, when I'm tired or frustrated, the memory of that day comes back. And it hurts, I won't lie and say it's completely gone. But then I look at who you are now, at the friendship we've built, at our sons playing together, and I realize that Patricia and that Helen don't exist anymore. We've become different people, better people, Patricia completed. More complete people, Helen corrected gently, because we carry both the scars and the healing, and that makes us more understanding of the imperfections of others. The silence that followed was comfortable, full of mutual understanding. Two women whom society said should never be friends, who came from such different worlds they should barely touch, were there, connected by the most human experience of all, the capacity to grow through pain. Years later, when Helen received a Nurse of the Year award for her work with at-risk mothers, Patricia was in the front row, applauding standing up. When Patricia published a book about her journey of personal transformation that became a bestseller, Helen organized the launch and signed every copy next to her friend. Lucas got into medical school on a full scholarship, and in his acceptance speech, he mentioned both his mother and Patricia as examples of resilience. Gabriel grew up sensitive and aware, choosing to pursue a career in social work to help children in vulnerable situations. And all because, at a crucial moment, one woman chose compassion over revenge. She chose to see the humanity in the one who had dehumanized her. And another woman chose humility over pride, change over stagnation. The aisle of that grocery store where it all began was eventually renovated. The floors were replaced, the shelves rearranged. But if the walls could talk, they would tell the story of an encounter that changed two lives forever. They would tell that the humiliation of that day was terrible, but that from it sprouted something unexpected and beautiful. Because sometimes justice doesn't come as punishment. It comes as transformation. And true power isn't in destroying those who hurt us, but in helping them become better people, and in the process becoming better ourselves. Helen never walked down that cereal aisle again without remembering, but what she felt was no longer pure pain. It was a complex mix of gratitude for the journey, pride for the strength she found within herself, and renewed hope in the human capacity for genuine change. Patricia, in turn, kept a photo of that grocery store in her wallet, not to punish herself, but to remember. On days when the temptation to revert to old patterns of arrogance arose, she looked at that photo and asked herself, "Who do you want to be today?" And the answer was always the same. Someone her son could be proud of. Someone who honored the sacrifice Helen made by saving her when she didn't deserve to be saved. Someone who understood that privilege comes with responsibility, and that treating all people well isn't kindness. It's the minimum expected of any decent human being. The story of Helen and Patricia became local legend. Mothers told it to their daughters. Teachers used it as an example in lessons on empathy. Therapists cited it in sessions about forgiveness and reconciliation. But for the two women at the center of this story, it wasn't about becoming a legend. It was about waking up every day and consciously choosing to be the kindest, truest, and most courageous version of themselves. It was about building an unlikely friendship that defied all social expectations. It was about proving that our past does not define our future and that it is never, ever too late to start over. Comment below "Transformation is possible" to let me know you made it to the end of this video, and I'll mark your comment with a special heart. And if Helen and Patricia's story moved you, I have another even more surprising one to share with you. Just click on the video that's appearing on your screen now and I'll tell you all about it. A big hug and see you next time for another emotional story. Bye-bye.